Before we get started, I want to offer a trigger warning because we want to take care of each other.
Mhm.
It's very important to be aware of this as you're going in. Now, as we proceed through the presentation, you will have the opportunity, whenever you feel like it, to ask Talia. I'm sorry. I thought you were a stately home in the South for a second. To ask Talia questions. And the way you ask Talia questions is you go to the bottom of your Zoom window and you see something along the menu on the bottom that says Q&A. And you click on that, and there's a box where you can type in a question, a comment, a thought, an observation, whatever you want to do. And we will get to as many of those as we can as we proceed through the presentation. And feel free to type those in at any time, whether I'm talking, whether Talia's talking. Go ahead, when you think of something, put it in there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, please welcome Talia Fletcher, survivor, hero, Talia Fletcher. Talia, thank you for doing this today.
Well, thank you very much for reaching out and providing an opportunity for me to if I can talk, continue to share my story.
The first thing I'm going to ask you, and you know this because we talk about all this stuff ahead of time, the first thing I'm going to ask you is to tell us a little bit about your background, about your story, basically what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm one of the people that doesn't have a whole lot of concrete memories, if you want to use that word, I guess is the best word. I will tell you that I was sexually abused by my father from maybe like 3, 4, 5 years old, around that time frame, up until he left the family at about, I think I was 10 or 11. Timing is not timing gets a little weebly wobbly when it comes to me and my memories and my ability to put together my history. And so it's one of those interesting things, and I want to bring it up and I want to still talk about it, because I think that there are a lot of people who have more complete memories, which makes it, I hate using the word easier because it is not easy no matter what your memories are, but it provides, I always felt like it provided other people a better platform to say, I'm a sex abuse survivor. And I always felt like I didn't have that platform because I didn't remember. But here's the thing is, I may not remember, but I know. I don't remember everything, but I know. And my body remembers, and my body knows. And the way that I react and interact with the world, even now, today, even though I'm healing finally, or working on healing, I know. I used to try to stay awake at night so that I could tell my father no. Those are not the memories of somebody that didn't go through something.
What you said about, not necessarily being able to pinpoint all of the memories, having a general idea, that is so true of so many survivors, I think, and it's definitely true of me. The fact that I do this work and I have examined and re-examined over the years what I've been through, I started off with some memories and a lot completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered some things I had no idea about over the course of having discussions with people, over the course of telling my story publicly, over the course of people asking me questions and having sudden realizations, over the course of people walking up to me after a public presentation and saying, you said this, but if that's true, then something else might be true, and it triggers. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're looking at here is we as a community are helping each other, and it is quite normal to look to each other for the assistance in regaining memory. Mm-hmm. You talked about your father and that he left the family at one point. Can you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, sexual abuse and really any kind of abuse is a game of manipulation by the abuser. And so my dad used to take me out for like car rides. It was just us, and we'd go get ice cream, although I swear I didn't really end up getting ice cream most of the time. We ended up someplace else. And he would tell me that he was going to leave the family and that he was going to take me with him. And that is, it's a wedge that creates an us and them situation with the abuser. And I think that this is the part people fascinate me, and like this dynamic. I mean, even as a kid, I remember kind of going, this just doesn't seem right. This seems really wrong, and just trying to figure out what was. And as I got older and started really observing other people, always trying to figure out like what exactly is going on here. And as I look back on that, it's, it's a manipulation point. It's a way to make me feel special. It was a way to, have some very weird, messed up, like show that he loved me, I think, in his weird, messed up abuser way. So I knew he was going to leave. And then one night he left to go to the store to get something and never came back. And he did not take me with him, clearly, which, I think is absolutely a godsend, right? Like, I'm so glad that he didn't, because God knows where I would be right now, and what would have happened, what would have continued happening to me would have absolutely continued to happen to me. But what that also created was the wrath of my mother, who was also very abusive, verbally and emotionally. So since the time I can remember up until I stopped talking to her 10 years ago. So there was no safe place for me as a child. There was nobody I could go to for safety. My mother knew my father was sexually abusing myself. Doctors knew, and nobody told anybody ever. And this was before doctors were required to report. So I'm hoping that now that they're required to report these things, that maybe, children are being removed from the home, but that wasn't a requirement then. And so it never happened. And so, and the abuse just continued again until he left. So lots of failures of the system, I will say.
Absolutely. I mean, it happens over and over again. I mean, when
Yeah.
I went through the abuse in the 70s, the system basically was one big failure. And in decades and decades later, we still have a lot of those problems.
Yeah.
You talked about the wrath of your mother when your father left. Do you think that your mother thought you bore any responsibility? Do you think she blamed you in any way for your father
Oh,
leaving?
yeah, absolutely. Because you go into, as a kid growing up in an abusive home, you go into this survival mode, right? So you think I thought I was under the protection of my father, as messed up as that really is. And so I ingratiated myself to him while he was there, because my mother was abusive also. And so, but to me, at least, like, the abuse I got from my dad felt good, right? And that, which is a horrible thing to say, because it doesn't really, but it kind of does still in some way, because you're getting something that your body reacts to in a positive way, even though you don't want it to. And so when my dad left and left me behind, I kind of kicked into this like super survival mode where it's like, okay, well, now I have to figure out how to ingratiate myself with my mother, my other abuser. And so when she said, and I remember this at that night, and she was like, did any of you know, and this is awesome, right? This is like abuse 101. Did any of you know that he was planning on leaving? Did any of you like keep that a secret from me? And of course, trying to ingratiate myself, I said, I knew, he did tell me. And so it just, and I thought, I don't know what I thought. I thought I was saving myself. I thought I was saving myself from some other wrath. I was also the scapegoat. So, I mean, I was the scapegoat, regardless of what I did. It didn't matter. Like, I could have grown angel wings and like floated around and like given her lots of money, and I would have been the scapegoat. So, but I did attempt to sort of, ingratiate in that way and sort of come clean with my knowledge. And that did not go well for me at all. So this is my therapy cat, Misha, by the way. She will make an appearance.
Hello, Misha.
Come on, baby girl, get down.
How is your relationship with your mother now?
I don't have one. I stopped talking to her in May 2012. It was a year before I got married, and I had a conversation with her that was an hour and a half long, and all it was about her and about all the ways that I had wronged her by planning to have my wedding in another state, and how I was stupid to get married because men will just use you and throw you away as soon as they have gotten whatever it is they want from you. And it just went on for like an hour and a half. And I remember getting off the phone with her, and my husband was out, my now husband was outside the door, and he said, and he just looked at me and he was like, that, he goes, it went that well, huh? And I go, it's the same old, it's the same old, same old. It's like things are going well in my life and she has to shit all over it. And I was just like, I cannot continue to function like this. And I wasn't in therapy yet. I wasn't really dealing with anything at all. But I had tried, at least from my perspective, I tried to sort of extend the olive branch, try to have a relationship with this person, try to, something so that I would have a mom. But she is incapable of being that person. She doesn't have the tools, is how a therapist described it to me, that my mother doesn't have the tools to be a parent, and unfortunately that, I got stuck with the parent that didn't have a toolbox. I got stuck with two parents that didn't have toolboxes. And what they had was like a toolbox full of dysfunction and abuse.
Wow. Yeah,
it's like the wrong toolbox.
I completely understand 100% what you're talking about, because you know a little of my story, and you know the person who was abusing me left the house, and that left me with my mother, who was horrible. Neither of them should have ever been parents.
Yeah.
So you talked about getting married, right?
Yeah.
And you're currently married. You're in this
Yes.
relationship.
Yep.
How does that look to you as a survivor in a relationship, a committed relationship like that? How does your relationship look to you? How does that work for you? What are the advantages or disadvantages or whatever to that relationship as a survivor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it's an everyday struggle, really, to not bring forward what my therapist refers to as old programming. So I grew up learning all the things, not only learning those things, but having them incorporated into my brain, which was developing and forming at those times. And so my brain, some of my pathways are probably not the best pathways for certain things. And because of that, I try to be as aware as I can in my relationship, especially with my husband, because my parents' relationship was very volatile and aggressive, and there was a lot of anger, and there was a lot of not dealing with things and not talking about things and not working through things and not being true partners with each other. And so for me, I try very hard to maintain this partnership with my husband. We're in couples therapy. We're both in individual therapy. And we've been married, what year is it? It'll be 10 years next year. And for the first 7.5 years of our marriage, I was an alcoholic. And I think that I fell into alcoholism over the years. I'd been drinking since I was like 13 years old, and kind of had these like peaks and valleys of like, major drinking periods, and then I would not drink for a while. But the first 7.5 years of our marriage, I would say it was pretty much straight up like, I am just drinking all the time. Any chance I could, any chance I got, any excuse I could make, anything. So I really, I put him through a lot. I put him through a lot those first several years, and it got worse as the years went on. And he was the person that said to me, it was December 2018, and he said, "You're going down a path that I don't want to follow, and I can't follow, and I can't help you. You need help." And it was that moment of, I know he loves me, I know he cares about me, and he is telling me something that I know deep within myself, but didn't want to admit. And so ever since that, it's been me trying to make sure that I am the best person that I can be for myself and also for him in our relationship, because, he did stick by me and he continues to stick by me. And I continue to try my best to not bring my past into my present, which is really, really hard. And I slip. I mean, I do. Like, nobody's perfect. I get angry with him, and not his fault, but I get angry with him when I'm under like high stress or anxiety or all these things. And my brain, my behavioral pattern defaults back to that anger and that frustration, and I take it out on him. So it is a constant, it's kind of a constant therapy session with us, I think.
Do you see, this is interesting because I often have talked about reacting out of the abuse to people who didn't abuse me simply because they may use a similar word or a similar phrase, or they may look a certain way, or they have looked at me in a certain way, or I may have heard noise and I'm reacting to them, not out of who they actually are, but I'm reacting to them out of this trigger of my mother or my abuser or the people who bullied me or the teachers and all these people.
Yeah.
And you say, yes, you're trying to be the best you can for him. At the same time, I'm sure he isn't perfect because none of us are.
None of us are.
How do you have that conversation where there's also things he needs to work on as well for the relationship?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk about that a lot. For my poor hubs. So I have a startle, like you and I've talked about this. I'm kind of a fainting goat where like I get startled easily in certain situations, not all situations. And he tries really, really hard. Like at first he thought it was funny because literally like he would come into a room and it was like I had my back to the door or something, and I'd be like, I would literally just cry out because I didn't hear him, and it startled me, and it triggered me, and I would sort of start to just disassociate. And I have to sort of say to him, like, you've got to be, when he tries, he'll be like, I made a lot of noise walking up the stairs. I like knocked on the door. And, so there are certain things that he has to do. And it kind of, and in that light too, which is more of announcing your physical presence to me, it's also, not being passive aggressive. Like if you need something, come out and say that you need it, right? Because my mother was very passive aggressive, as are a lot of abusive parents, and people I think tend to kind of lean towards that passive aggression. And so if he says something and it's kind of more passive aggressive, which we all do, I mean, we all do that, right? It's just having the awareness of it. And it's like, well, instead of saying it like that, say it like this, because when you say it like that and that passive aggression comes through, then it's like the shields go up. I get very defensive. I totally shut down, and I don't want to hear a goddamn thing out of your mouth. So which is not helpful. Not helpful at all.
It's wonderful though to hear that there's that communication going on, because I think I hear from, and certainly I did it for years, that I was the damaged one, and therefore all the work was on me. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky whoever was with me because they were just putting up with all of this stuff, and it's good to hear that you guys are talking to each other, and there isn't this sort of like, it's your stuff, yeah. It's not your stuff. It's like, it's us. And that passive aggressive thing is fascinating to me because I both dealt with it, as you said, from a parent. I mean, my mom could go between passive to utterly psychotically violent, mm-hmm. aggressive. And I wrestled with passive aggression as a way to deal with things in relationships for years, because it'd be part of my brain would say, well, I'm lucky they're putting up with me. I shouldn't complain, although this bothers me. It's my problem that it bothers me. And then I would get full up to here. And it wasn't that they'd done anything horrible. It's that I had not given them, as you're saying, the full trip, I hadn't let okay, well, that bugs me a little bit. Or you know what, that word doesn't work for me because of this thing that happened to me. And we hadn't had that conversation. And I think it's great that you guys are having these conversations, because I got to tell you, it took me, I don't want to talk about how many long-term relationships till finally, I mean, we're going on 16 years now, and this has been the best relationship of my life and continues to be. And one of the reasons it continues to be is because in the first year when I was tearing myself to shreds, my wife said, she kept trying to help. And she said, I've run out of ways to help. Will you go back into therapy? And she helped me find a trauma-informed therapist, and that changed everything. So we got that communication open. And the fact that the communication is open doesn't mean that everything is perfect. Things happen. Every once in a while, we do argue about something. Sometimes I'll react and go, hold on. And like 2 seconds later, or 5 minutes later, or 10 minutes later, I'll go, I'm sorry, that wasn't you. She is very considerate, but she's not tiptoeing around me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we're talking. If I say something off or she says something off, we talk about it. It's interesting you mentioned dissociating when you're startled.
Oh,
because dissociating from threat, I think or perceived threat is fairly common. And I say it not as a medical professional, which I'm not, but as somebody who's done a hell of a lot of it.
It's
talk a bit about
right,
because a lot of survivors know what dissociation is, but some don't, and people have different sort of experiences of it. Could you talk a little bit about what it's like for you when you dissociate?
Yeah, it's, and by the way, for years, I didn't know that I was doing this. It really has taken, I've been in weekly therapy for 3 years, 2.5, 3 years now. So it really has taken me a long time and a lot of therapy to figure out, to really kind of sit with myself and sit with some of these reactions and try to figure out what they are. So for me, dissociation is like my ears start kind of ringing. It's almost like tinnitus. Like it's this tinnitus, it just kind of keeps increasing in volume, and it basically shuts everything else out. So this supercharged ringing in my ears, the world kind of starts to go gray, which is where I kind of equate myself to a fainting goat, because I actually like slightly lose consciousness, I think, because my world eventually, like the gray kind of comes in and then my world goes black for a second. And my husband's actually seen me, he's seen me do that. And I think he didn't understand what it was before either. But like, I think the last time I did it was probably a couple months ago that I specifically remember, where he was standing in front of me so he could watch my face. And he just kind of goes, whoa, you went somewhere. And I go, yeah, I went nowhere. But so I don't know what my face looked like, but it was enough for him to be like, wow, that was really interesting. And then it, usually, I don't know how long, time doesn't really have, when you disassociate, time has no meaning. I kind of come back out of it. I think I come out of it pretty quickly. I have yet to like truly fall over and truly be a fainting goat, but it definitely feels like I'm about to. It feels like I'm about but I'm not conscious of it. Because everything has just gone like kind of that gray black, and it just sort of goes away and the world disappears for a period of time.
Before we continue, I want to quickly get to a comment here.
Yeah.
This is from Yona, who, by the way, is another amazing survivor that I've met recently. Yona is
Hi, Yona.
Awesome. Yes, you will love Yona when you meet Yona.
Okay.
He says, just a comment, but the way you are describing your mother is how I would describe my mother. And that I think is interesting, is that a lot of us have had the same parents.
Yeah.
As a survivor, do you find yourself bumping into people who you think had the same mom and dad?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that what I find is that there are similarities between all of these different abusers. There are such similarities between like fathers as abusers who are usually sexual abusers. And I'm not saying all the time, but usually. And then like, women or mothers who are abusive, like emotionally and verbally abusive. And I find it's fascinating because I think that at the core of it comes from different places. Like men typically, again, I'm not trying to say every man, you have been taught throughout history in society to gain power and control. And rape, whether that's incestuous rape or rape, is all about power and control. And then women, on the other hand, it's a more subtle emotional, because we women are taught to sort of take care of the emotions of the things, and so they become emotional abusers. Again, I am not a therapist, I am not a scientist, clearly observations, but I think that it is really interesting that there are these similarities, and I think they are because of the pressures that society puts on women versus the pressures and expectations that society puts on men, that women tend to be more of that emotional verbal abuser versus physical. And again, there are definitely women out there that are physically abusive. And, and my mother got there a couple of times when like the anger was truly on her, when the spirit of anger was truly there. I mean, she would get abusive, and she would hit me, but never, never enough to leave a mark. And she always could explain it away because we had horses. So she'd always be like, "Oh, Talia got kicked by a horse." It's like, yeah, okay. Such a convenient lie. Or like she and I got into a fight one time, and one of our dogs bit me, and I went to school and like my arm was bleeding, and I had these dog bites on my arm, and it was basically blamed on me somehow. I'm not too sure how that was, but it ended up being my fault. So so I think but anyway, I think it is interesting that there are such similarities, and I think it's also why this is so important to share our stories and to come out with these things, because of those similarities, and to share that, and so that other people kind of understand that the way you were treated growing up was not right. It was not right. That person abused you. And I had that person that told me that when I was 16 years old. She pulled me aside one day and she said, "Talia, the way that your mother treats you is wrong." And I she said, "Your mother is abusive." And I literally just started it's like tears just streamed down my face, because I had been trying to tell people my truth. I had been trying to explain this. I had been trying to do this for so long, and nobody saw it. Nobody wanted to deal with it. Nobody wanted to hear it. I don't really know, but here's this person who saw and said something, and it literally changed the trajectory of my life. I mean, so it's so important, I think, to have this, to say, this is what I went through. This is what my, and to share those similarities and to talk about that, to break that cycle too.
I have no doubt you sharing today will reach a lot of people, both people who are here now and when this gets put up on the web afterwards. Because I agree 100%, being able to tell each other these stories and realize how many similarities they are.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about a person taking you aside, that person taking you aside and saying, what your mother is doing to you is abuse. She's abusive towards you. To me, for me, that was the, it's not you moment. It wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. I was taught to believe that I deserved what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
But as an adult, over certain, with certain encounters with people and talking to people and stuff like that over time, I began to learn. It took a long time to learn that everything bad that happened to me in my life was not my fault. And if bad things happened to me again, sometimes it was my fault, and sometimes it wasn't my fault. Sometimes I was an a-hole and I deserved to be called out on it, because none of us are perfect. But sometimes, there's no reason except that person is abusive.
Yeah.
And to know that, and for us to talk to each other like we are now, and to know there's no reason that we don't have to feel responsible for that.
Yeah.
What I see,
not responsible for that.
Right. What I see with you is the credit, the admiration that I have for you for making the decision to talk about this, which is very, very difficult. And a lot of people never will be able to. And those people are also brave just for getting through day to day, but making the decision to talk about this, because this is going to help so many other people. And being out here right now, being so candid with the questions that I ask you, that to me, it's all the credit to you and all the blame to them. We talk about, talking about your story being public. And you said, things changed for you with 16 when this person spoke to you. When when was the moment that you first well, this is going to be a number of different questions. We're going to start with this one.
Okay.
When was the moment when you first disclosed to anyone that you had been sexually abused by your father?
The moment that I remember, I was 18 and it was to my boyfriend at the time. And he recoiled physically from me like I had a disease and then sort of walked away. I'm trying to remember if I told the person, so the woman who basically pulled me aside, her name was Jean. She passed away many years ago, unfortunately. I don't know if I ever told, I don't know if I ever told her, but that was my first recollection of actually telling another person part of my truth. And the reaction that I got was the reason that I think I just kept that to myself for a really long time. Because it was the definitely wrong way to respond to that. But you know, and I know one of the questions you and I talked about was how people have responded to me sort of coming out and telling my story.
Yeah.
I think this leads into it. So do you want me to go ahead, or was that like a follow-on question?
Sure,
I don't want to jump ahead.
Definitely lead into it, but before you do that, I want to ask you one other question, if it's okay to ask one other question about this boyfriend.
Yeah.
How did you said you felt the message you got was it was the wrong thing to do, which of course it's not, but you got the message it was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
How did you feel about him when he reacted like this? Did your feelings about him change at all?
Yeah, I think they really did. You know, I mean, we were both young-ish people, and so there's a part of me that was like, you know, there's always this part of me that I can look at the other person, I can say, I can understand why you recoiled from me, because somehow there's this like, you know, it's like being marked as a leper or something in our society. If you talk about being sexually abused, if you bring this up or whatever. And he was young. So, I mean, he doesn't know how to respond to that. He doesn't know what to do with it. But it definitely changed kind of my viewpoint of him, because I'm like, hey, put your head out of your butt and just don't respond like that. Like, you don't have to say anything, but at least keep your body from physically recoiling from me would have been a really great start to that. And also I remember thinking, well, what the hell is wrong with you? Now I have to feel like I have to come to you and tell you that it's okay, when I'm the one that was like sexually abused by my dad, and I'm the one that you really should be like comforting in some way, but instead you ran away. And that's your like, he literally like had to leave the room. Like, he couldn't handle it. And I'm thinking, you can't handle it. I fucking lived it. Like,
how in this scenario, you have every right to expect support and caring and love from this person. Yeah. There is nothing in this scenario, nowhere in this scenario, that his reaction, in my opinion, was a reasonable reaction. This is the person who's supposed to be there for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know you're saying he was young. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. But his place with you in the world was, you know, I think I hear you saying this too, that it was to be there for you and you to be there for him. And he just walked away. Yeah. Like, somehow, what if it had been another kind of pain? What if you'd been in a plane crash? Yeah. What if, you know, you had a chronic illness that you hadn't told him about? What if, you know, it's like, he should, how would he have reacted then? You know, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, I had said before we did this, I want you to talk about how people have reacted in your life. And that's one situation, but I want to hear about how, you know, family people, community people, friends, you know, go ahead. Yeah. Tell me about that.
I think it's important to talk about this too, because, you know, I had therapy yesterday. So I was talking to my therapist about this, because people respond to me in different ways. And it's always one of those where I'm like, really? That's your response? You think that's okay to say? And I said to her, I'm like, you know, what is this? Is it like ignorance? Is it just, they're just an idiot? which is kind of like being ignorant, but maybe worse. I don't know. And so it was trying to, figure this stuff out. And so, I think there's different categories of people, is what I've discovered. And the one category is the people who truly are here for me, truly want to help me in my growth and my healing, and have just come out and said, that must be really hard. How can I best help and support you? Which is like the best thing to be said. You could even say, okay, I'm here for you in whatever way that looks like. I just might need some help figuring out what that is, right? So there's that group of people. Then there's a group of people that I kind of refer to as like the surface people, who are like, wow, that's really interesting. And then they literally start looking away. And I go, okay, I see where you are. I see where you are. It's okay. It's, and I don't begrudge. I don't want to be in people's faces. People have to also be ready to sort of receive some of this as well. And I understand it can be hard to talk about. It can be hard to look at me. And if you care and love about me, to know that people were that horrible to me, that people abused me as a kid growing up, or that anybody would abuse any kid really. But, and then there's just the like pure ignorance category, which is probably the one I'm going to focus on a little bit, because it can be the most damaging in so many ways. And I know that, my husband said to me one time, he's like, well, what's the manual on talking to somebody who's a recovering alcoholic? And I go, well, one, don't be a dick. It's don't just, if you can't think of something to say that doesn't have anything to do with yourself, because that's what people like to do. It's like they get uncomfortable, so they then start talking about themselves, which sometimes is appropriate, sometimes not. You kind of need to gauge that. So that can be a stumbling block. But if you literally are not sure what to say, don't say anything at all, or just hold space with that person, or even say to them, I'm not too sure what to say, but I'm here for you. I'm holding space with you. Something along those lines. Like, you don't have to open your mouth, insert your foot, and just continue to eat your leg. I mean, it's like, and I think that, the people that have responded to me with a level of ignorance that is astounding at times. I feel like I'm like, wow, I'm really glad that I'm like as far into like my healing as I am, because depending on where you are in your healing process and your healing journey, when someone says something to you that is ignorant, it can be damaging to you. And I will say that some of the things that people said to me were kind of damaging. Like, one person, I started trying to tell my story, and she immediately like kind of put up these weird walls and was talking about how, like, she used to work in the school system, and she always made sure that, if she saw something, she always said something. I'm like, well, that's great. How does that help? Like, what does that have to do with me? Nothing. And just kind of really this very nervous like energy of not really wanting to talk about it, but feeling like she needed to say something, which just made it like so much worse. And then saying that, she thinks that what she thinks is abuse, other people don't think is abuse, which kind of piqued my curiosity inside of my head, where I went, well, what do you mean? And she said that she thinks it's abusive when parents don't make their kids carry their backpacks. And I was like,
can I interject here for a moment?
Yes.
This is a prime example of somebody who doesn't understand the impact of abuse.
Yeah.
Because if they think it's abusive when kids are not told to, or not made to wear their backpacks, that to me spells that they think abuse is not that impactful.
Right.
And they don't see a difference. And there's a hell of a lot of difference between whether you wear your backpack or not, and whether somebody has sexually abused you or violently or mentally or emotionally abused you over a series of years and drilled that all into your psyche and into your soul. And it affects the way that you operate in the world as a human being. To me, that is so trivializing. I'm kind of pissed off on your behalf right now. I'm not kind of pissed off. I'm pissed off on your behalf right now.
I was mad. I left that particular, meeting, and I like cried all the way home. And I basically was like, I am not going to be engaging with that person if I don't have to, basically. And so it's very, it turns into, it turns into a periphery. So, I mean, and I think, some other examples, just so people kind of have an idea of like what I'm talking about when people are coming from a place of ignorance. The person I mentioned earlier, or I don't know if I mentioned it actually during this or you and I were talking about beforehand, the person that likes to like come up behind me and clap me on the shoulders, like it's triggering and I disassociate. And I finally, was able to say something to this person, and this other person across the table was like, well, if you had just told him that. I'm thinking, well, if this person would just have like fucking respected my boundaries as a human being, then they wouldn't be triggering me either. So can we just talk about boundaries and having them, and not assuming that everybody doesn't have boundaries around their personal being? Like, respect me as an adult human and just don't touch me. How about that?
Yeah, there is enough out there now about social interaction up front that you can read anywhere and see anywhere, in television, in the media, your friends talking about it, whatever, that has to do with personal boundaries. And has to do with, people are waking up, not because they woke up, but because we have helped them to wake up, are waking up to the fact that there are people of differing emotional, psychological backgrounds, and there are people with, who deal with mental health challenges on a daily basis, and this doesn't make them wrong, and it doesn't make them broken, and this doesn't make them bad. And that it is reasonable, as you're saying, bottom line, basic level of respect, not to put your hands on somebody unless they allow you to. There's this thing which just blows my mind. And you see particularly guys doing it. Whenever I've been at like a show, at a concert or something, and we're all standing, guys to come through the crowd, they won't do it to other guys, but they'll put their hands on the backs of women as they walk through the crowd. And I'm like, who told you that you could do that? And honestly, I am surrounded by people now, for the most part, who know if they want to hug me, even if they've hugged me in the past, they get to say, can I hug you? And I learned to say, may I hug you? And reasonably, like if somebody says something to me that's very moving in one of these conversations in person, which has been a long time because of the pandemic, but if somebody says something to me, I feel like I want to reach out to them. Crossing that boundary is not my right.
Yeah.
That's up to them. And if they say no, I respect that. And it's not like this is something, put aside people who have been abused. This is something in culture that we're waking up to. It's not like it's not everywhere. It's in TV shows. It's in sitcoms that you watch. It's in things you read. You can't miss it. It's in music. It's everywhere. Boundaries, as you're saying, boundaries.
Yeah.
What do people not get? It's not like they have to search for the information.
No, they literally don't get boundaries. They don't have boundaries. So I've been like, one of the struggles that one of the challenges, I guess, not really a struggle, it's a challenge, is I grew up not being allowed to have boundaries, right? Because if you as someone who was abused, whose abuser needed to push off all of this negative stuff onto me, I wasn't allowed to have boundaries. Boundaries were not a thing that I learned what they were. I didn't understand what that meant. I'm still working on it. I literally months ago said to my therapist, because she said, well, it's boundaries, Talia. And I go, okay, what are boundaries? Like, I literally was like, I don't know. I'm 47 years old and I don't know what boundaries, I don't know what that means. People use that word all the time. I don't get it. Right. So she, we talked about it a lot. It's just literally people don't understand what boundaries are. And I've been reading this book, which I guess, well, if somebody wants to know what I'm reading, I will totally share it with you. But anyway, and it talks about boundaries.
Please, go ahead and share what the book is.
Okay. All right. Hold on. I have to look it up on my Kindle because I don't remember things very well. So I have to look things up, which is certainly.
That's another discussion about memory, but maybe we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, it definitely, if you want to see somebody that has issues with memory because of abuse, that would be me. Where is it? Now I'm not finding it because her name is really cool, but I'm like
That's all right. We
horrible.
can set it aside for now, and you can just continue from
Okay.
here. And if it happens to, you happen to think of it, I could add it to this presentation later on too, if you happen to think of it afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't want to take up too much time. Oh, set boundaries. I just found it. Of course. Set boundaries, find peace, a guide to reclaiming yourself by Nedra Glover Tawab. I'm probably not saying her last name correctly, so I apologize. But this is an amazing book, and it literally taught me everything about boundaries. And what I've realized by reading this book is that most people don't have them. They don't know what they are. They don't understand them when someone puts them in place, and all of the things that happen because of that. And so I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't know, like my husband said, there's no like protocol on how to talk to someone who's a recovering alcoholic. There's no protocol on how to talk to somebody who is, a survivor of childhood abuse and trauma. And I understand where he's coming from, because I think in some ways people feel like, well, how am I supposed to know? And I was like, well, just start with boundaries and respect. Just start with that. You don't need to know every single person's story, every single person's history to treat somebody with respect, and therefore respect their boundaries, and you'll be fine. It's when you break that boundary and you break that threshold and you then are telling that person that you don't respect them, that you're going to trigger somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you don't need to know everything. You just need to know that there is a thing called boundaries. And there is a thing that if you hear somebody has been abused, you need to be respectful of that. I just think there's getting to be less and less excuse not to know these days. And I'm not picking on your husband, trust me.
Yeah,
I understand the
I know.
communication that you're trying to have and he's trying to have with you. That's not what I'm saying. So it sounds like that's what I'm saying. But like, yeah, I congratulate you on the work.
It's okay.
Yeah, but I understand that they congratulate you on the work that you've done to make that, to open up that communication. And you're right, boundaries, I mean, just to listen and to be, as you said earlier, just to be with somebody, to sit with somebody, because we don't need you to fix our lives.
Yeah, no.
But just to respect, I want to talk about healing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about things you have done, things you have employed to try to heal, and what has helped you and how it has helped you, and maybe where those things came from, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say number one thing is therapy. Therapy. I could say that a million times. I'd kind of been in and out of therapy, but never really opened up to a therapist, never really until a couple of years ago when I realized that I was definitely going down a bad path and it was not going to be good. So therapy definitely helped. And in therapy, I rediscovered writing. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a poet. I wrote poetry. I've, written, and I stepped away from that because people discouraged me. I don't think they meant to, but they did discourage me from going into that as a career choice. And so I rediscovered that my favored and primary form of communication and healing and figuring myself out and figuring out the world around me is through my writing. And so I started, it's a funny story. I just want to share this. So my therapist, when I lived in Maryland, she gave me these worksheets, right? So she'd give me pieces of paper, and I would write these, when I felt something, I would kind of write it down on this worksheet. And I started using arrows to like continue my sentences onto the backs of the paper and like all this stuff. And I brought this, paperwork in with all these arrows everywhere. And she goes, I think we just need to use a journal. And I said, yeah, that probably makes sense. So then I started journaling, which then turned into a blog, which I still, keep up and do things with that. And so I think for me, those were the two things that were the key, but I don't know that I would have rediscovered my love of writing had it not been for therapy. So I really do think that therapy absolutely is the key to healing and to really learning about yourself and being able to heal yourself with the help of this person who guides you on that process.
May I ask you, is your therapist trauma informed?
I don't think so. I actually didn't ask her that. I
The stuff
think
she
that,
sounds like she's doing, if she's not trauma informed, she's definitely been reading up on it.
yeah, I think my therapist in Maryland was probably more trauma informed, although I don't know that she would describe herself as that way. And my therapist in South Carolina, I've actually never asked her that, but she probably is. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, honestly, Michael, I don't know what that really means. I
I'm
don't.
learning about it.
That's
I've learned over the
that's like
years.
a new term thing that I was like, there's trauma informed therapy.
Exactly. It became a new thing for me when I told you when my wife said, "Would you go back to therapy?" And
Yeah.
I had been in and out of therapy a bunch of times, as you did, and I sat down with a therapist who actually had been treating both children and adults who had been through childhood trauma of various kinds. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know this is 2000 and well before 2009, because 2009 was like a high watermark for our work together, but it was 2007,
Yeah.
maybe something like that.
Okay.
And I didn't have words trauma informed. I had no idea. I don't think I realized that my therapist was trauma informed until after 2014, when I'd already started doing the show, doing my play, and gotten the words trauma informed, and then started looking at it. I think there are therapists out there who may not be per se like you're saying, they may not consider themselves trauma informed,
Yeah.
but yours is clearly aware. I mean, things like journaling and things like, and then the things she talks to you about, and the things that she supports you in. She sees your trauma as important, and she sees it as impactful, and she guides you, which is just so wonderful. I know there are people who don't swear by therapy, and that is fine.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I swear by therapy, and I think therapy is magnificent. I think
Yeah.
therapy is wonderful. We
And
have a question here.
ooh,
Hold on.
okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt you there too.
No.
So Yona says, in my limited experience, trauma informed is almost like a specialty, as in they've had special training. I feel like that's true, to be sort of officially called trauma informed. But I think there's therapists out there who are not officially called trauma informed, like yours, who they're just
Yeah, he
their heads
doesn't.
are in
I
the
mean,
right place.
I'm trying to think it, thinking I remember reading her bio, and I don't remember seeing it. But then again, it's been a while since I read her bio, because I've been with my South Carolina therapist for several years at this point. So,
Right.
I really think there's this part of me that's kind of like, do you have to say that you're like you're a therapist? You should truly look at the whole person and look at their childhood and at their history and take all of that into account as you're helping this person to heal. Slightly snarky Talia there, but I'm like, really? Does it have to be? I mean, I'm not trying to say like it's not a good
I agree with
thing.
you. I agree with you 100%. I agree with everything you just said. I don't think that's snarky at all. If you're a therapist, geez, your job is to listen and to care about the whole human.
Right. Because every single thing on your journey in life has affected you to this point in time. I mean, I was listening to a podcast, and this is something like I'm fascinated by people. I've always been fascinated by people. Fascinated by why people do the things they do and things like that. But neuroscience has taken such leaps and bounds with the technology that we have with, fMRIs and all this other. It's like so cool. But there was a neuroscientist that was on a podcast, and he said that our brains change every single time we experience something new. So our brain from like 5 minutes ago is different than our brain right now, because we're constantly taking in all this information. We're not aware of it all the time because of how our bodies work. And it like blows my mind that it took, I feel like recent, but I, again, I'm not a therapist. I don't keep up with everything, but it's taken us this long, however this long really means, to realize that abuse and trauma affects your brain, and then therefore it affects how you perceive and react and interact with the world. And I'm like, duh.
You talk about wiring, and trauma wires your brain in a certain way to interact with the world. But you know what else? Healing rewires your brain. People being kind rewires your brain. People sitting with you rewires your brain. A good therapist rewires your brain.
Yeah,
Giving yourself the space and time just to be and not judge yourself all the time rewires your brain. So we can rewire it.
absolutely. Yeah. That's, you know, and I was thinking about this the other day because I really truly think that, and this might come across as harsh because people have told me it sounds kind of harsh, but we have choices. We as people have choices. There are some things that we do not have choices in. It was not my choice to be abused as a child. It wasn't your choice to be abused as a child. If it was, I would have absolutely not chosen that as a choice because it's a really sucky one. So, but I think that as we get older and as we move away from the things that influenced us that we had no choice or no say in, that we do then have a choice in how we, you know, both talk to ourselves internally, but also how we talk and interact with other people. And what I see as I sort of, you know, have been taking this journey is that there are a lot of people that are really trying to make a choice that is the best choice for them. And in that choice, you change the way that your brain is. You're changing those pathways in your brain when it is a choice, you know, to leave dysfunctional programming behind and move towards more functional programming, or to leave, you know, negative or harmful boundaries behind to go towards boundaries that are healthy for not only you but the people in your life. There are choices, and we make these choices every day, and our brain takes those choices in and actually does things with them, so that next time we're in a situation, instead of reacting like I still do, to go back to old programming sometimes, that's where my brain goes initially. I know that in years from now, my brain won't go there. It won't go back to that old programming because I'm teaching it new ways. It's like a little puppy dog in my head.
That's wonderful. Is it as a sort of analogy for that I found fascinating a few years back that my therapist talked about, which is that your experience, it's like walking paths in your brain, right? Your experience with abuse or whatever will drill down and create a pathway in your brain. So when something happens that's similar to it, you'll go along that path, and that path will take you to the bad place.
Yeah.
Because that's been drilled in, that path is there. And therapy and this rewiring is all about creating new paths to walk. So the well-worn path is no longer the well-worn path. The new path becomes the well-worn path. The well-worn path becomes the one that says, you know what? I don't deserve the blame for my abuse. You know what? Today I can't handle stuff, so I get to take a rest. Tomorrow I will talk about this stuff, and I will face it and deal with it. The next day maybe I'll have to do something, but you create pathways that aren't, this is awful, this sucks, collapse. Your pathway becomes, yes, this is awful. There are ways to deal with it. It's going to take a while. It's going to suck. It may suck after I fix it, but I'll find new pathways where I can go. And then every once in a while you go, something happens that could have thrown you spinning off into blackness. And instead you go, hey, there's this path. And that path leads me to feeling stronger about this. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm aware of it, and I haven't reacted out of it. I've gone, let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that for a change. This has gone by really, really fast.
I know it really has.
My God, my God, my God, my God. Before we go, is there anything else that you want to say? And don't feel rushed. Take your time.
Wow, I mean, you know, there's so, I'm like, how much time do we really have? Because I have so many things. You know, I think for those people who are listening because maybe they have themselves, you know, grown up in an abusive or are an adult survivor of abuse and trauma, I think the important thing is to remember is believe yourself. You know the truth. Don't let other people take that away from you. I let other people take that away from me a lot more. Not now, but you know, in the past I've allowed people to tell me that I didn't remember that correctly, or it was, you know, maybe I had done this and that, you know, which basically is just, you know, you've turned into, I describe it like this. I had a prison that was built for me when I was a child, not a literal one, but like that sort of emotional abusive one. And when I left, my jailers left, but I I became my own jailer. I kept that prison up. And, you know, I only really started 3 years ago to sort of realize that I was the one that was really keeping myself trapped beyond what had been done, what had happened to me growing up. And I think it's important to remember that, and it's important to keep that in mind, that yes, there were people that trapped us and did horrible things to us when we were growing up and we had no choice. And unfortunately, what that ends up being is that we keep that behavioral pattern, we keep that abusive pattern running in our head constantly, and it keeps on going, it keeps on going until we stop it. And I think that it's important to not allow people to tell you that you're wrong and to continue to blame you for things that are definitely not your fault. And here's the other thing is, and this is a tough one, if your family was abusive and they are not seeing that and they are not changing that, then you need to think about stepping away from your family. And that is really hard. And it was really hard for me to do that. But at the same time, like I had to do that. I had to. And the only person that I talk to in my family now is my sister. Everybody else I don't talk to them. Sometimes you have to do the hard things to save yourself.
It's a hard truth, and it's something that I went through as well. So yeah, when the people are toxic, they're just helping to keep those negative pathways there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was absolutely amazing, and I appreciate everything you said today. As always, I feel better now, so it's been a really good therapy session for me. So that's awesome. Yay. I hope other people here have gotten the same out of it. I'm sure they have gotten a hell of a lot out of this. This will be reposted, so you will see this pop up. If you hold on just a moment, I want to make sure everybody gets to see this. If you are not already on our mailing list and you want to make sure that you know about all of these things, including when things are posted, including your opportunity, if you wanted to come on and talk about your story, or if you were a poet and you wanted to read your poetry, or any of the things that we do, we also do support groups for survivors. You want to subscribe to our mailing list? That's at tinyletter.com/askasurvivor. That is the most direct way, because often social media gets in the way and we don't reach people, even those people who are following us. Facebook blocks us from a lot of people who follow us because they want to charge me money for ads to reach my own followers. So let's bypass all of that stuff and let's talk directly to each other. And like I said, if you are a survivor and you are ready to tell your story and you want to do one of these events, contact me at askasurvivor@gmail.com, askasurvivor@gmail.com. And that address is good for any questions you have about anything. If you're a poet, if you're an author, whatever you want, we're out here. Our whole point of being here is to amplify the voices of survivors worldwide. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Talia again for being here. And once again, it's been a great session for me. So hopefully we all feel better.
Well, thank you. I know. I hope so.
Thank you. And I look forward to talking again with all of you and with you, Talia. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.